Hello to everyone. My name is Klaus Möller. I've been working with DFN-CERT for the last 20 years, and I will be your presenter for today. And I'm sorry for the delay too, and I hope you can now see my slides on the screen, and
Yes,
we
Klaus.
will start right away. So topic for today is forensics for system administrators. And we'll start this webinar with a bit of information about how to organize the general process of incident response and forensics. So, as you've seen, we've sent out a small poll to see how many of you have already done forensics investigations or incident response work in your organizations. So, and I think many of these bullet points here may look familiar to you, like why forensics investigations are not concluded or not done properly. First of all, especially organization looks like a lot of paperwork, a dry administrative work. And yeah, many of us may have these attitude of I solve problems, I do not administer them. And there's always the question of, do we have the time and the money for any large-scale investigations of forensics, unless, of course, we are perhaps forced to do so because some major incident has shut down a large part of our operations, for example, by ransomware. Initially, there's often no or very little budget for tools, for training, for the effort itself, because all the time you do forensics and incident response, and you can sink a lot of time in a forensic investigation, could be done doing other work, which is also piling up on our desks. Then there's probably the lack of forensic tools, or you don't know which one of them is suitable for the job, and you haven't been trained in using them. And then there is always a phrase, yeah, is it worth the effort? Do we get them? And very often we don't. We end up at some foreign IP address, and that's it. Well, I can't do much about the last part, but for the first bullet points, there are maybe some points to counter this. Why doing forensic investigation and why organize our work? First of all, a uncoordinated or unplanned response will be much less effective or even counterproductive compared to an organized and structured approach. The evidence may be destroyed or may be made inadmissible at court, although that depends very much on your legislation. But also doing a uncoordinated and unorganized response may mean that you might overlook traces and do not get the whole picture. Then there are legal or regulatory requirements. For example, if you need some certification, for example, the ISO 27000 certification, which requires you to have at least an incident response and forensics plan to get a proper certification, or the German IT Grundschutz requires a bit of preparation here. The United States National Institute of Standards has another standards on this. So if it's very likely that your country may have some of this, and if you're a part of critical infrastructures or some other medical infrastructure, you may have to put some work into here. Then there is the idea that forensic knowledge is not so specialized as not to be transferable into other areas of work. having a bit of forensic knowledge can help with the troubleshooting in our daily operational work. It can help us in monitoring and analyzing log files, and it can also be applied to the job of data recovery. That means trying to undelete files or cloning disk drives. So that's quite a bit of application layer here. And then there is a certain overlap of what we do in incident response and forensics with the work we will already be doing if we do some sort of business continuity management. So planning for disasters like floodings, power outages, fires, whatever else. And some of this is also reusable here, especially in the paperwork, like having a telephone list or knowing where your systems are and what software is installed on them. And last not least, it may be that training and especially for forensics and incident response can be a lot of fun. Learning this, solving riddles, and even the high-level staff trainings for incident response, like the GÉANT Klaus training, can be a lot of fun to attend, and you can learn a lot of them here. So, but when we speak about forensics, we always speak about courts and laws. And let me send one thing in advance. We are not lawyers. We are computer scientists by training. Stefan and Tobias, which will be my colleagues, which do other sessions here, are also computer scientists. So everything we can give here is more a technical and organizational advice. And we are not qualified to give you any sound legal advice. Please do this with your own legal counsel. Even if we were qualified lawyers, we would be at best qualified with German law and not with the laws of over 30 countries in Europe alone. And I've seen we have attendees from far more countries than just Europe. And as a specialty, German law forbids non-lawyers to give legal advice. So I keep this as brief and as general as possible, so I don't get into trouble here. But speaking of legal responsibilities, it's not only a matter of criminal code or criminal proceedings. It's also a matter of workplace law, privacy protection law, even disciplinary codes that you have to adhere if you're a member of a state organization. And please do not only consult with your legal counsel, don't forget your data or privacy protection officer or ombudsperson or the workforce organizations that are applicable in your country. They may have a word to say here also. And let me repeat this one. Please check with your legal counsel, make them your friends, or you will end up in a big swamp. So with that in mind, let us continue now to the organizational part. First, forensics is a part of incident response. And so before talking about forensics, let me just briefly introduce the incident response workflow. And there are basically two different kinds of standards and workflows here. One is from the ISO, which is part of the ISO 27000 standard series. It's 27035 in the iteration from 2016. It's a part of 4 standards, and the 4th is now in draft. And it has basically 5 basic steps. Start with a planning and preparation part, then a detection and assessment phase, where we detect the incident and assess the damage done and what has happened. And then we have a responses part and, of course, a post-incident part and a lessons learned part. So if you are familiar with something like the Deming cycle, you will recognize this as the typical plan, do, check, and act cycle, which is prevalent in many management standards. As the ISO standards are not free, you can buy them for about 170 Swiss francs or euros, and with four part standards and a lot of other ISO standards, this can add up to quite a bit of money, and it's a management standard, and it's probably not so much meant for those who do the practical work. And for that part, I very much recommend the standards from the United States National Institute of Standards. They have a series of special publications, and the one that does incident response coverage is the special publication 800-61 in the revision 2. It's also from 2012. And the NIST standard is very similar to the ISO standard. This is in part owed to the fact that a lot of people have been working on both standards, and so the similarities are not entirely coincident. And but the best part about the United States standard is that they are more practical and they are freely downloadable from the internet. So as to the NIST standard has a preparation phase, a detection phase, a responses phase, it's called containment, eradication, and recovery here, and a post-incident activity. The coloring here is by myself, so as you can better see the similarities between the 2 standards. So let's start with the first step, the preparation phase. This means we first have to do a lot of documentation and a general work on how the incident is handled by whom. So that is covered in the documentation list, which covers at least a contact list with phone numbers and email addresses. It is a list of hard and software configurations, where your systems are located, in which rack they are located, or on which host, which virtual machine, or which Docker container is, keys for the rooms to access this, and how to access the rooms at night or on weekdays or on national holidays, so that we can do a quick response if it needs to be. Then, of course, we have to know our analysis and incident response tools and have them ready to use. It's taking a lot of time if you have to then download them from the internet and put them somewhere on a USB stick and grab yourself a laptop, which is not prepared for this and used otherwise or is outdated. So you can save a lot of time here if you have this stuff ready. Then we need the workflows, who is to contact, who is responsible for taking care of an incident for a given system, who is doing the exercises, so who is preparing and leading you through exercises, and you should be doing exercises. And then there's mundane things like, what personnel is assigned with how much of their time to these tasks. Have we the hardware ready, like hard disks and USB sticks for saving data? Do we have a room to work in, especially if we are dealing with insider threats? There might be a meeting room or a small office where we can mate and perhaps have even a lock and key for that, so we can keep stuff confidential here. One thing to remember when we do the preparation is that this plan has to work when most of your infrastructure is down. Think of a ransomware attack where your Active Directory has been hit, your file server is down, your email server is down, your web server is perhaps down, or you're suffering from a large-scale denial of service attack and you don't have any internet connectivity, or yeah, even in the worst place, you may have a fire which burns down your whole data center. So keep in mind that you may have to work with a bit of provisional or improvised infrastructure here. The goal here is just to have a plan, to have a general idea of what to do. And the advantage is that it will save us time and money. It will have a great reduction on the stress you will have when you actually have to do the incident handling, because yeah, having thought this through and discussed this with your colleagues and your superiors will save yourself a lot of stress. And in the end, it's about making an impact when doing incident response. So then the first part about an incident, of course, is detecting it. This is done either by automated examination of system states, which means you get an alarm from your system or network management system, your SIEMs, your log analysis, or whatever else you have here. You may also have a threat intelligence feed or get some automated external alarm messages from your security provider. So when these things spring up, you're most likely to know that there is an incident happening, or at least something serious. Of course, you have to be alerted in time. Many incidents go unnoticed for weeks, even months, before they are finally detected. So the big advice I can give you here, yes, you need to watch your logs and alarms. All your SIEMs and your network management is worth nothing if nobody has a look on this and reacts to what they say you. And then don't forget that you may have to manually process incoming alerts or notifications. Your users or partners may notify you just by an email, be it ancient, they may send you a fax or even walk into your office and say, well, I have something suspicious here on my machine. Could you have a look at it? So when you have your first suspicion that there may be something going on, you have to build upon this. And this means you have to systematically search for traces on the affected machines on your network, and you have to document your findings and all the suspicious facts by starting with what tipped you off. This doesn't need something elaborate. It can be just bullet points. It can be a spreadsheet. It can be your trouble ticket systems where you write this down. As we all know, it's very difficult to remember things a day after. And if we are going to take things to court, the actual court proceeding may take place months and years later. And so having a bit of a trail here, what happened and what you've done is essentially in reconstructing the event. The goal here in this phase is to know if there's really a security incident or not. So then we'll do the analysis. So when we know we have an incident, what has happening? So what damage has been done? For example, yes, we don't have internet connectivity, or our email server has been hacked and converted into a spamming host, or ransomware has encrypted our Active Directory, or whatever else. How it has happened, this is a bit of the most difficult question. Which vulnerabilities were exploited, which weaknesses, maybe something as trivial as a password, maybe even something that you can't do much about, like in a DDoS attack, you can probably buy a bigger internet link, but that wouldn't help you much. When it did happen, which means we would like to construct a timeline of events, and probably can do some projections about potential damage that may occur when the incident will continue. And then there's also the questions of who may also be affected, especially if our system or our network has been used as a stepping stone to attack other networks or to attack other systems within our organization. So, and this analysis part is where forensics will come into play. In a very short part, it may be a bit of a detection, but most of the forensics will happen here in the analysis part. So the goal is here first to have an input in the next phase, the responses, and it also means we may have to triage which incidents have precedence. We may end up in something where we might have to handle more than one incident at the same time. And then at that time, we have to do some prioritizing which incident is more severe or more in need of addressing, and this has to be done here. So then we have the responses. One of the responses may be containment. So we have the short-term goal of just minimizing the damage from the incident. And in some incidents, containment may be all we can do. Think of DDoS attacks, where we can just wait till it stops and get back to work as good as we can. But with more to this, here is we can do have to do a lot of coordination with the third parties. So this can be your organization's ISP in the case of a DDoS attack. We may have to contact the media, which will likely be our media offices or press officers. We have probably to deal with the law enforcement or some government regulatory offices, especially if we have personal information or we are belonging to critical infrastructures, medical information. Then we are likely to be required to report this to the authorities. Other parties may be the software vendors when we want to report vulnerabilities. We may have to talk to our telecommunication provider. We may have to talk to other affected external parties if we can recognize from which network it's coming or which network was attacked from our side. Our incident response team, our legal officers, our privacy protection officers, etc., etc. So, and on the other side, if we do containment or error addiction, it may mean that we have to reinstall systems, very likely, and it's very much recommended to do reinstallation of systems because we can never be sure to get rid of all the malware and backdoors that are left on the system. So in the end, when we come to the responses part, we want as a long-term goal the attackers being gone from our systems, and we want to be pretty sure that they can't come back through the same holes. So then there is the post-incident activity, which means we should have, at least with a larger incidents, a meeting with all the actors, at least the internal actors, get some processing of the facts as far as we know them, prepare a final report of the incident. So what has happened, how have we reacted, what has been done well, which areas need improvement. This report may even be in several versions, one for the media, one for the upper management, one for the internal technical department. So, and of course, as there are a lot of persons involved in a large-scale incident and they will spend a lot of overtime into it, you should praise and acknowledge the work done here, and then you should take care of the documentation and dissemination of what you've learned from this incident, that we can be a bit better prepared next time. That means, of course, we have to see if there's anything we need to do on our incident handling, incident response, or forensic processes so that we can correct any gaps and problems. And as the saying goes, after one incident is before the next incident. And over time, we can hope to become better and better at handling incidents. So, if it's happening, you've been hacked, now what? First thing as an advice is don't panic. And really, this is not joking, I'm serious about this. You may end up in a lot of stress here, lots of people trying to talk to you at once, management is on your back, somebody from the media might be asking, users may line up in front of your office and asking what's happening, and lots and lots of things here. So first thing is really don't get hectic, just calm down, get a cup of tea or whatever beverage you are, probably non-alcoholic, please. And yes, what to do then? Follow the agreed upon plan from the preparation phase. If you have one, it's not unlikely that the first incidents may get you off guard and you don't have a plan yet. So, but if you don't have a plan, please make up your mind. That's where the don't panic helps. So we don't want to fuss around. I've talked about this. Undirected, unsystematic approaches may destroy traces. Coordinate with your colleagues, your leaders, your customers, and whoever else may be coming in here. This is very important. Don't do anything on your own. Then another advice is take your time. I know you might notice the incidents just a quarter of an hour before end of business day on Friday, and you're with your mind already in your weekend, and yeah. But no, if it's an incident that needs handling now, please, yeah, take your time. This isn't done in 5 minutes. So take off your coat again and get back to work. And one thing that you always should be considering when you're doing incident response is do not do the attacker's work. We had one incident like a DDoS attack happening on Friday afternoon, and the guy there in charge had the idea of just disconnecting the internet from his organization for the whole weekend. And so at this time, yes, his organization was able to work internally, but had no internet connectivity for 2 days, which meant that the attacker could go home early too, because he had accomplished his goal of taking you off the network. So yes, it helps to spend a moment of time and try to look at the incident from the attacker's point of view and ask yourself what he or she would have liked to accomplish, and will my response help them in achieving their goals or not? And then there is a decision point. You have 2 ways. First is the legal route. You may think, yeah, this incident is so serious, we want to take things to court. You think that your case and your evidence will be good enough, or we are required to take legal action because our superiors say so, or we are required by law or regulations to report this and have no choice but to involve law enforcement and authorities. So in this case, the best thing we can do is to let the investigation being done by trained forensics experts, preferably from law enforcement. They know how to do this and how to take matters to court properly. So get your law enforcement or your attorney general involved here and let them do the work and direct you through this incident. However, most of this course from here on will not be suitable for you, because we are not trying to train you to be full forensics experts or law enforcement officers. But there is an alternative route. So we don't want to involve law enforcement because, yeah, we might think that what we have at evidence or data here is not good enough to stand up in court, or will not be good enough. And we also don't see this as worth the effort for handling a smaller incident. And in the end, as I've said on the first slide, we might not see a chance to get the culprits. And so our main goal here is just to get back into secure service as soon as possible. So, and then there is a way to do forensics the quick and dirty way. This is a term coined by Leif Nixon, who has been done a lot of incident response work in the last decades. So one thing we might come up with as an idea is, yeah, it's probably a virus, just reinstall the system and forget about the whole thing. The idea is no, because there might be backdoors left by the attackers, and so they will come back through these backdoors. Or if we just reinstall the system with the same patch level or the same configuration, we will very likely be reinfected. May it be by the same intruders, which means just by clicking on the same spam mail again, or by others who will exploit the same hole. So to get back into secure service, we might have like to answer a few questions. How did they get in? When did they do this? So we have a point in time where we can say, okay, from here and back, the backups are likely to be safe and without backdoors, or the data is not corrupted. What have they been doing on our system, which is hard to assess sometimes. If we have a ransomware, we know, yes, they have been encrypting our files. In other cases, yes, I'm not sure on how much data he got access to and if it's now being transferred somewhere offsite, and is it confidential data or not? What worth is this data? Can we stop them from returning, and which other sites may have been hit? There may be more questions you may come up with, and yeah, that's the reasons why we will do a forensic investigation, although it's probably not the same way law enforcement would do it. So that's the incident preparation phase. Now let's go on to the forensic workflows. So what's forensics anyway? It's a short term for forensic science. In some textbooks, this is called criminalistics. The term comes from the Latin word forensis, which means matters of or before the forum. The forum was the court place in ancient Rome, where all legal proceedings had to take place, so the public could watch this. And in our times, it means the application of science to criminal and civil laws during a criminal investigation. So, and a forensic scientist is then somebody who collects, preserves, and analyzes scientific evidence during the course of an investigation. Yeah, we all have watched TV where forensic happens, and we know that there is a lot of forensic fields. Practically every field of science can be applied to court matters. There's the dactyloscopy, which is the traditional fingerprinting taking, but we also know about forensic psychology and psychiatry, which deals with assessing the mental state of people involved in crimes. But there might be even some things like meteorology, where we examine the weather conditions at a crime scene. Forensic engineering comes in, especially when buildings or other sites have been affected, like investigation fires or breakdowns of buildings. Forensic accounting is especially done in financial cases, and the area here which we'll concentrate from here on is digital forensics. It's just one of many areas of forensic science, but quite an important one. So a bit of terminology. The data we'll deal with is officially called electronically stored information, or ESI. And the process of acquiring and searching this electronically stored information is called e-discovery. And electronic evidence then is evidence that is stored electronically or digitally, as opposed to other types of evidence like written documents or physical evidence or testimonies. And to be a bit more precise, an evidence is what is used to establish facts in court cases. So from here on, we are probably not talking about evidence, but just stored information and traces to distinguish this from the evidence as used in courts. So the characteristics of this ESI is, first of all, it's invisible to the untrained eye. That doesn't mean that we can't see bits directly. It means that we often have to retrieve this from places which are known or accessible only to experts. Like, think of the slack space in a partition, or deleted files or deleted records in a database, which we might need to get our hands on. Then it has to be interpreted by a specialist sometimes, so as to be valid from a judicial point of view. And of course, electronic information is highly volatile. System state, as we know, changes constantly with each events within nanoseconds today. So, and this also means that deleted and old data will be overwritten, or when we power off a system, the volatile state, the contents of the main memory will be lost. And so we may need proper tools and techniques to get this information copied off the system and preserved in a proper way. But on the other hand, digital data can be copied without limits, and so specialists can work in parallel on their copies of the same information at the same time in different places. And we have the possibility to present this evidence then in court along with the specialist witness report, and even alongside the original, say, media or system where the incident or the crime has happened. So again, there are two different workflows, one from the ISO, it's the ISO standard 27050, or the United States Special Publication 800-86. So let's go through this. And as I've talked about preparation, which is not part of the two standards, but again, this should be done. We should define our roles for the forensic processes, like when we should initiate forensics and who is responsible for doing this, who is then responsible for collecting the data, where should the data be stored, should it be locked away, and where is the cabinet located, where is the evidence bags, and lots of stuff like this. How is information flow meant to be, and how does this all fit in with our larger incident response plans and business continuity processes? We have to select hard and software, for example, especially if we need to store data. We need some hard disks or USB sticks to store the traces on. We have to secure maybe other resources, again, like rooms or just a desk to work on, or maybe a small camera if we like to photograph or videograph what we are doing. And we need, of course, a management support, and we need some training. So this is nothing to do with forensics in specific, especially only in preparing to do a forensic investigation at all. Then there is the operational preparation, which means we should set the scope of a forensic investigation. That means, what is the goal? What do we want to find out? And what questions do we want to answer by the forensic investigation? And what shall be examined here? So, and this is a step you should take quite serious, because this will very much set the scope and pace of the forensic investigation from here on. And you may get carried away during the investigation by lots and lots of stuff you find, and you may get overwhelmed by all the data you may probably like to investigate. And phrasing and writing down precise questions of what you want to know will help you to stay focused and goal-oriented, and not get carried away, and be just efficient, because you will also be on a bit of a time budget. You don't have weeks or months to do all the investigation. You will want to go back into secure service as soon as possible, which means you only have hours or days at best to do this investigation. So think about the following case as an example. We have a newly bought USB stick, and this was inserted into a system which later turned out to be infected with malware. And so we came up with the 3 questions in this case. First one, is there no malware on the stick? And what type and kind of malware is it? And what we especially like to know as a sub-question, how does it spread? Does it spread only via media, or does it spread over the network? And what does this malware do? And then there is the third question, aside from the malware, is there any other sort of data or software, rootkits, hidden partitions, malware on the stick that we want to know about? So this could just be 3 questions that you would like to answer in a case. But on the other hand, you may end up with different phrasings, and it will very much depend on the amount of time you would like to spend, the type of incident that is happening, and many, many other factors. And so I can't give you here a general advice, but just accept what I've been saying. Set yourself a goal and put down some questions for the investigation so you can stay on focus here. So, and then we'll end up in the first real phase of forensic investigations, which means we like to identify and preserve the electronically stored information. So the first phase is we select the electronic information we want to collect. So what do we want to collect? Which hard disks on which systems? Which memory contents we'd like to examine? But it also can mean network information. Do we have packet captures or network flow information, or is it already present and collected somewhere on our network, or do we want to make a packet capture? Are there log files or log entries we want to get our hands on that may be on the affected systems or on our SIEM or log host or whatever else we may have here? And when we select this here, we may need to further narrow down this to relevant information, like a time frame or some users involved. We might not need to get all logs and all disks from everybody on our network, which is just too much. So, and narrowing down this here will certainly keep your work down to a manageable level and down to the time frame you've set yourself for the information. And if you have strong privacy protection laws in your country, it also means that certain information may need to be excluded because it's personal information, and we are not to allow to access this information. So, and then when we know what to collect, for example, the hard disk and memory of a system, we need to know where it is. So that it's just the physical location of the systems or the media attached to it. And if it's a virtual machine, we may need to know on which host it's running, or if it's a container. And last but not least, how much data is it? That means how much size will it take up on our system? So as a general rule of thumb, think of you will need at least twice the amount of data. You will make one copy as your master copy, and you will need another copy as your work copy to do the analysis on. So plan at least for twice this to work, and then add some additional space for your own processing. So maybe about another 20+%. The preservation part is mostly about putting electronically stored information on legal hold. This is the so-called freeze here. It means that we want to assure that data is not deleted or rotated out and then deleted, or it will not be altered or substituted by whoever is doing here something on that data. So, and this also means that preservation will mean that you are not allowed to disclose what's going on to third parties or even other parties in your own organization. Remember that in case you might be hindering a criminal investigation here, that may also get yourself into legal trouble if you blow up the investigation here. And then there is the question of what information do we need to collect first. And here it is that the general way what to collect first is determined by the order of volatility. So, and volatility means, we have information that may change within nanoseconds, like registers on a processor or cache lines. Well, don't bother too much about this because, yes, we can't get a hold on a register state at a specific nanosecond. But when it comes down to information that will be present in the system for a bit longer, like a process that is running maybe only a few seconds or even longer times, minutes, daemon may even run for hours or days. Then we have open sockets, which means open network connections on our systems, which are again present for seconds or minutes. Open files, active users, meaning users that are logged on to our systems. The network configuration, which means not only what interfaces are up on the system, what IP addresses do they have, what's the routing information, do we have virtual interfaces like VPNs or tunnels or stuff here, failover configurations, which part of the failover here is active. This may all be sort of relevant to our investigation. And then there is on Windows system the registry, which is kept with its current state in memory, and it's only written to files when the system is shutting down or the user is logging out. This holds also true to other system configuration databases, like the configuration store on your Macintosh or even your GNOME or KDE desktop states that you have on your Linux or other Unix system. So at this part, we would like to do a live response, which means we will take data from the running system, because all this data lives in main memory. And if we reboot or power off the system, it may end up in a totally different configuration. Other processes may be running, the process of the attacker may be lost here. Network connections will be certainly gone. Files may be closed, users will be logged out. The network configuration may be different, VPN interfaces being gone, registry state will be gone. So it may also, especially in the case of network information, be lost when we pull the network plug. when things run into timeouts, the connections will be closed and shut down. The downside is, of course, that we live here on a system where also the attacker is present and the malware from the attacker, for example, a rootkit, is present and active on the system. So we may have to take into account that the data we get is not complete or even faked. On the other hand, we have long-term information like files that are closed and on disk, unused blocks, slack space, partitions, whole hard disks, which generally have a much longer lifetime. This data can be analyzed and collected post-mortem, so it will usually survive a reboot. But remember that there are also shared memory file systems which may live in main memory and do not survive reboots. And on the other hand, a reboot may also mean that file system logs are written here, so the disk state may not be completely unaltered here. But we will come to this in more detail in the next webinars. So, and then there is the actual collecting of the data, which means we will right away output from tools. We may do image creation as bit-by-bit copies of the media, like the main memory or the storage medias, which are attached. And we also collect the logs, the net flows, the packet captures, which are just written directly to our storage medias. Then there are some surrounding conditions. One of them is we want to change system state as little as possible so that we are not altering too much evidence. It's a bit of physically impossible to do a measurement or a copying without changing system state at all, but we will like to keep this down to a minimum. And as I've said, we want to put as little trust as possible in a compromised system because the malware might be altering the information. And again here, document what you've been doing. Who has been doing this, when, where, and where the collected data is kept. Nothing is more annoying than having done all this and then having lost the USB stick where we kept the data on. So, and like the first decision point, we have another decision point, live response or post-mortem. Again, this is not really an either or decision, but it's important to keep this in mind. I've talked about this here and I've summarized this in this table here. Live response will be collecting volatile information that would otherwise be lost. And when we isolate or power off the system, it's gone. On the other hand, our actions may tip off the intruder and they can do whatever they want here. They may get in panic or they may just leave and do nothing, but they also might delete stuff like their own malware, or even worse, they may spring up their encryption routines or wipe the hard disks and other cases. We had lots of incidents where we were even able to talk to them on the chat room on the system. Isolating or powering off the system may also tip off the attacker if he's installed some sort of deadman switch software, but in practice, this is rare. So this can be done, and it will prevent further damage, at least to other systems. Our own system is then powered off and unavailable, but that's a price we'll have to pay here. So after we've collected the data, so we made copies of our logs and bit images of our main memory and hard disks, we have to import the data into the forensic tools so we can search and analyze this data. This may even mean that we will extract certain file types and document types like pictures, videos, office documents, emails. It may also mean extracting of browser histories, or it may mean reconstruction and extraction of deleted files and other information. This stage will also deal with filtering out unneeded data or information so that we can narrow down the focus of our investigation. Also taking place here is the normalization of different data formats of ASCII, EBSTIC, Unicode normalization. We have to deal with that probably. And another thing we have to deal with is timestamps. So we may need to take different clock settings into account if our investigation will span multiple time zones, or if we have switches between summer and winter time. This may even mean that the system did not make the transition from summer or winter time properly, and the time is off here, or it may have lost connection to the NTP server and the clock is now no longer synchronized. So we have to take this into account and normalize this within a certain degree. And this then means we build up a sort of timeline, or sometimes called a super timeline, to have chronologically searching for events. So when I know this has happened, for example, on Thursday at 10 o'clock, I can search around 10 minutes before and after what happened there to have a first step in my investigation. And I can also use this timeline to visualize the chronological sequence of events for later reports. Then comes the point where we slowly have to start with the real forensic work. And this means the assessment of the collected data. Starting point then will be the questions from the operational preparation. And what we try to do is here we will break down the high-level operational questions into smaller questions, which may be even subdivided further, until we end up at questions that can be answered directly from the data we have at hand. This is called sort of a divide and conquer process, a term coined by Brian Carrier, now of Basis Tech and the author of the Sluice-Kit and autopsy tools. What it means at the lowest level, we will be searching for the so-called indicators of compromise, or it's an IOC. These are artifacts on our systems that may point to the compromise of a system, like say a login from a very far away land in the middle of the night, which is probably not supposed to happen here, or a virus that is detected by our antivirus scanner, or anything else. Checksums of files that match known malware, or we have a new account on our system with root privileges, which is almost certainly an indicator of a compromise. So, and after we've analyzed the data, examined the data, we have to do the analysis. So that means from the examined data, we'd like to draw conclusions. And again, we have to be careful. The data from the compromised system will be or is very likely to be forged or at least altered. Data will be incomplete. Very likely, we will not have a full picture. So, and when we do the analysis, a guiding principle is basically everything is hearsay, unless we can prove it from independent or trustworthy sources. For example, I may see logins on the log messages from my system, but unless I can probably back up this with a NetFlow log from my own network, which I know is not compromised, then I can be fairly sure that there has really been a login on the system if it's matched by a proper NetFlow log that shows, for example, that there is a secure shell connection happening at the same time. And but in the end, the results will always have a certain amount of uncertainness. So especially when we are tasked with the question of, has there been a compromise or not? And this is the point where all the incident responders get very vague and say, well, we haven't found a trace, but we can't rule this out with 100% certainty. So if we have a good incident responder, he will always be very careful when answering that question. So it might also mean that we have to collect more data, so we have to reiterate our steps. Or we may find that during this investigation that other systems have been compromised and we want to collect data from them too. So analysis objects, again, this is a schematic from Brian Carrier, file system forensic analysis. At the lowest or most abstract level, here's a physical storage media as differentiated from network analysis. And physical storage is also the main memory banks on the system where we do memory analysis upon, or the volume analysis, which means typically our hard disks or NVMs, SSDs, and whatever else we may have here. May even be a CD or DVD here if it's still present on your system. On this, we have file systems, we have maybe databases, we have swap spaces in their separate partitions. And at a higher level, we will end up at analyzing specific applications, like, for example, your browser or any other system that may have been compromised here. So if we are done, the final step is then the reporting and production. So this means we need to present the results of our investigations to our target groups, with a special case being to present this at a court of law. And this is something where I would like to remind you of the part when you do want to take matters to court, leave this to forensic experts and law enforcement, because they have been trained to do witnessing and presenting of evidence at court. And you will have very likely no training of this kind. Even if you know how to do forensic investigations technically, you are not trained to do a testimony at court. So this is usually done along with the original evidence, like your hard disk or even a laptop or whatever else you may want to present to the jury here. This will include timelines and typically will be composed of an executive summary for the management or the non-techie part, and a comprehensive report with a detailed description of what has been done and what media have been examined, what analysis steps have been taken, what problems were encountered, what questions were answered, which not, or which only partially. This is more for the technical experts. And then you can do some sort of recommendations for further proceedings. This is not always the kind, but it may be something that is coming up here, can be input for the next phases of incident response or as a general recommendation to improve your own security. So we're almost at the end. Let me just introduce the forensic principles which have been agreed upon by the European Union and the Council of Europe, which had in the early 2000s a Caesar of e-evidence guide, which was produced there. And there they had 5 principles that were identified that are commonly used internationally to have forensic evidence being applicable at court or admissible at court. So it's called data integrity, audit trail, specialist support, training, and legality. I will just cover the first 2 of them as they will be the most important in the next webinars. So data integrity means that we should alter the data as little as possible. What it says here, no action should change electronic devices or media which may be subsequently relied upon a court. As I've said, this is not always 100% possible. Think of starting a collection process on the system when doing a live response. Of course, this process is image is read from disk. It's been allocated a process slot. Memory is allocated to run this process from. System state will change as a result of this action, but this is inevitable to collect the evidence. But it depends on the way we collect evidence, and we have to be making sure that we do not start the same process over and over or start a lot of useless processes. Just keep this down to the minimum. So, and the other part is the audit trail. I've talked about this here. Also, an audit trail or other record of all actions taken when handling electronic evidence should be created and preserved. So it doesn't mean that it has to be done electronically. It can be done in paper form. Depends a bit on your legislation, which type is admissible in court. The point about this audit trail is that an independent third party should be able to examine this audit trail and replicate the actions taken there and achieve the same result. Another term for this, especially in the American tradition, is the chain of custody. So what happens then when the chain of custody is broken or absent? The answer again is this depends on your country's legal system. When you come from the Anglo-Saxonian tradition of court proceedings where the evidence is presented to a lay jury, it means that a broken chain of custody makes evidence inadmissible. On the other hand, we have the continental European system where most of the assessment of the evidence is done by trained judges and court attorneys and lawyers, which are supposed to differentiate between hearsay and can properly assess which part of the evidence to rely upon or not. So in that case, it is very much up to the judge how he will assess a broken or absent or only partially present chain of custody. But it doesn't automatically mean that the chain of custody is unimportant in that legal system. And again, this very, very much depends on your own court system, and this is why you should consult with your legal counsel. So here's a sample chain of custody recording, which I've borrowed from an old Sun blueprint, which is unfortunately no longer available online, but maybe you still have some copy here. It's in a tabular form. It's here, first column is the item, for example, a complete workstation, date and time, if it's taken from, where it's taken, to where it's been taken, who has been doing this by name, and why he has been doing this or what he has been doing with the system. So it can be adjusted in a simple table form. So please, you can do it with your own spreadsheet or trouble ticket system. Or if you want to write this down on paper, there are lots of example chain of custody forms available on the internet, which you can adapt to your own liking. We still use some of these forms internally at DFN-CERT. So wrapping up, what have we covered today? It's the basic workflow of incident response and forensics. Prepare for incidents and forensics. Plan your investigation. What do you want to know? Where is the information to answer the question? Collect the ESI. And this is where most of the next webinars will focus upon. It's a collection phase, not so much examination and analysis. Examine and analyze the whole thing and report your findings. So I know it's been almost 90 minutes with a little delay. Sorry for the late start. So, but we still have, I think, about 20 minutes for questions and answers. So I'm now ready to take the questions.
Klaus, there are some questions. Thank you, Klaus. There are some questions in the question and answer panel. I think you can see them.
Yes, so we start with the first questions. What exact is the ISO 27K certificate? Do I need is as a forensic investigator? As a forensic investigator, no. You are certified with the ISO certification as an organization for a specific part, mostly of your organization. For example, a data center or even a single system or application. Second question, will taking a memory dump also be considered part of live forensics? Yes. Third question, how would you advise a young and growing CISO to get starting in cultivating IT forensic skills? What would your first three things that you would tell such a team to start when getting started? Oh, that's a difficult one. Three things, yeah. You will probably have some incidents that you would probably thought about doing forensics upon. So just start with, what questions do I want to know in this specific incident? So that you just in your mind walk through this workflow and have an idea of what to do. And when you discuss this with your colleagues, you will develop perhaps a first idea of how your incident response and forensic plan and workflow would look like. And if you reiterate this process perhaps a couple of times, then you will get some closer information on this. Second part, read the NIST publication, both 861 and 886. There's a lot of practical tips you can gain from there. The European Network and Information Security Agency, ENISA, also has a lot of information on their website, and it's available for free. And as a third part, if we just want to hone your forensic investigation skills, there are lots of sample disk images and cases like the HoneyNet challenge or others, where you can just try out some parts here. So this is something I would recommend as the first 3 steps. And by the way, thank you for this, because I've included some references in the back of my slides. Here's the incident and forensic standards. And if you just want to have a tool collection, there are many forensic distributions. The SANS Institute has one. It's called SIFT, the SANS Investigative Forensic Toolkit. Another one is maintained by some folks in Italy. It's called GÉANT, Computer-Aided Investigative Environment. I use this a lot. If you use Grimmel Linux as a part of emergency response, there's also a Grimmel modified distribution for forensic, which is called Grimmel Forensics. Many other distributions like Black Arch, Black Box, Kali, etc. are more geared towards penetration testing, but they do include forensic tools also. So if you are already familiar with Kali or Black Box, you may use this as a starting point. And if you are more comfortable with Windows, there's also the Safe Boot Disk, which helps you build up a forensic Windows environment. So I hope this answers your question. Then there are 2 more open questions. Would you protect an activity log, such as an example at the end, against tampering? If so, how? Well, that's a bit difficult, because it's hard to protect this. It's basically a 4 eyes principle. So at the end of the day, you can probably do a forensic checksum or store a photocopy in a safe place, different, and so have 2 copies that you can compare at the end of the investigation. But for the most part, we have to rely on the integrity of the investigators. But yes, that's one point why you shouldn't be doing this alone.
Thank you, Klaus. There is also a couple of questions in the chat, if we still have time.
Yeah, I think we still have a quarter of an hour. We have 1 more questions in the Q&A part, and then we'll go to the chat.
All right.
Is that okay?
Yeah, thank you. Sure. If everyone's okay with everyone, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Do you use something like X509 digital timestamping to be able to prove the timeline and chain of custody afterwards? Typically, we don't have a cryptographical timestamp present on the system, so it's probably of no use here. If we have investigations like some sort of PKI certificates, yes, there may be cryptographically signed timestamps present here, but that's depending on the kind of evidence here. we've been referenced in the webinar that trained forensics auditors are better prepared to defend evidence in court. What kind of training certification would you advise for that? Well, that depends on your country, which kind of certification is needed here. So you probably have to talk to your attorneys or a legal counsel, which is applicable here. So when you get started, there are obviously two extremes. Start with building the whole organizational part and postpone everything related to real security work, or get your hands dirty from the beginning. Where do you expecting the sweet spots to be with limited resources? Yeah, the sweet spot is what you actually can do while still making an impact, accomplish something. And my general advice is start small. Have at least vague idea, write down just a few bullet points, be it just one page with the organization part. And so you have at least something that you can pull off your desk drawer when need arises, and have at least once thought through when I suggest doing forensics to my superiors, what I will expect to find out, or where will I make a difference here. And when I've thought about this point beforehand, I think this will be me making a bit of a difference here. Is physical layer penetration a part of digital forensics, or has it more to do with a security break? I would probably see this more of a security break, but this depends. Like, say, for example, you have a hardware keylogger attached to the USB cable of a computer system. So then there's, of course, a security breach, perhaps, where somebody has entered your premises and attached this keylogger, or not, when it's done by an insider. But it's also a case of digital evidence. So the two are probably not always disconnected. So we have to apply different areas here. So let's now look into the chat. So no, greetings. Hello, video. Hello, everybody. Could we ask permissions to see the other participants? So it's fine. Don't forget ethics is one part. Yes, that's another point. If it's covered, yes, I know not everybody is happy enough to live in a country where you can rely on the integrity of the legal system. But unfortunately, that is nothing I can do something directly about. But ethics or ethically valid parts are something that has to be taken into account. And if it collides with the legal proceedings, or even what you probably would be required to do technically, it's a tough thing to answer. And the only advice I can give you here is that you should probably talk about this with others. Maybe even talk about when it gets too bad with a sort of psychological advisor. Will the recording be shared to our emails? Yeah, I think we have already posted the link here. Will the presentation be shared? Definitely yes. We will put them on the website. Will there also be a practical part, like an example case? Well, not in this webinar, but in the next ones, we will have a bit more of practical information here. It's the timestamping part. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Okay. When impossible to acquire physical artifacts from a targeted machines, is it in your experience admissible to use in court data extracted from the targeted company's SIEM or other concentration correlation tools? Well, the answer is maybe. It depends on what you can tell the court about how the data has been collected to your SIEM, how reliable this connection process, for example, is. If you just transfer logs by UDP syslog, yeah, we know it's technically not very reliable. On the other hand, if I have a cryptographically secured connection to transfer my logs, for example, SSL, it may be much more credible. And of course, it depends on what my logging system is being doing. Do I regularly delete uninteresting messages here, or are they still kept and I only have a narrowed down copy to work upon? So if I can answer all these questions to the court, it may be admissible. But again, it depends also on the kind of log data that is present there beforehand. If I've, for example, sampled NetFlow, this may be sketchy. So, any more questions?
I think Q&A panel is clear.
Yeah.
No one else had questions there. And
in the link it says black box.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's not a trouble, because in general DNS is agnostic to case. So if you type in black box with a capital B or not, it doesn't matter. So then all that's left to me is to thank you, and we hope to see you back on November 30th, when my colleague Stefan Kelm is doing the next webinar. So thank you so much for listening, and I hope you enjoyed it, and see you back soon.
Thank you so much, Klaus. There's lots of thanks in the chat. I think people really enjoyed the session, and thank you to you and to the audience for being with us today. Just a quick note from me, just to confirm that we will share the session recording link and provide access to the copy of the presentation. Also, people asked for whether it's possible to get certificate of attendance. Yes, it is. We can issue them, listing all sessions that you would have attended. We normally do it at the end of the training session, training program, which in this case is the end of January next year. But please send a message to me if you do require certificate of attendance. And once again, apologies for a bit of a hiccup at the start of the session. So aim to do better next time. Also, the original plan was to run a short survey to gauge the level of experience and expertise and exposure to the tasks of forensic tasks in the audience. But as these things happen, we probably will do it next time, or maybe even later on in the program, and turn it into more kind of a survey gauging the learning experience. We'll see. But anyway, thank you so much, everyone, for today, and wishing everyone to be safe and well, and have a good rest of the day. Thank you so much, and saying goodbye.